Welcome to the 24/7 Prayer Podcast. My name is Hannah Heather.
And my name's Brian Heasley.
And we are so glad that you have joined us today. And our special guest today is the amazing and inimitable Jill Weber. And she is going to be sharing with us all about monastic orders, Brian.
I know. She is the global convener of the Order of the Mustard Seed. That's a mouthful.
Definitely sounds like it's from The Lord of the Rings or the Knights of the Round Table.
Love it. Love it.
So today with Jill, we're going to be diving into the topic of monasticism and what role could a new monasticism play for the church in the world today. I think it was Bonhoeffer who said the restoration of the church will surely come from a form of new monasticism. So we're gonna delve into what that might mean today. And I think for me, one of the most striking moments in this interview is when we asked Jill the question, didn't we, of like, does this work?
Yeah.
Like, does this actually help you in your walk with Jesus? And a part of her answer, she said, I had this moment where I looked back and I wondered, what kind of disciple was I before this? And that just really struck me as a very poignant question of, you know, whether it's new monasticism or something else, like what is it within our own spiritualities that, you know, if we look back on, we could say, what sort of a disciple would I be without this?
I'm just loving the idea that we can explore some of those areas where I have questions about monasticism and the new monasticism, where, you know, is this weird? Is this insular?
Yeah.
Jill answers those questions, which is great.
So have a listen and we hope you enjoy.
So, Hannah, it's really exciting to be here today with Jill Weber.
Yay,
Hey, guys.
welcome, Jill.
Nice to be with you.
So, Jill, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yes. My name's Jill. I'm a human, a mere mortal.
That's good.
I've been married a long time to my husband, Kirk, who's a jazz drummer. I'm a mom of a 30-year-old. I'm entirely too young to be a mother of a 30-year-old.
Oh, my goodness.
And I have been dabbling in and experimenting in new monasticism now for almost 25 years.
Wow.
We could talk more about that in a little bit, what that is mostly. I pray and I make friends, really, is what I do. But in terms of job titles, currently I'm helping develop something called Waverley Abbey, which is where this is this crazy experiment of can we shape a new abbey for a new generation? And so I'm helping with the prayer community there. We'll talk more about that too. I have this horrible title, Brian. I can't stand the title, but it's a terrible title. I am the global convener of the Order of the Mustard Seed, which just sounds really bizarre.
The global convener.
The global convener, only because we're not intergalactic yet.
I think it'd be better, Jill, if you were called the global overlord.
The overlord. Yeah, we could totally do that. But actually, convener is a good word because it really means I just help people connect with each other. And so the Order of the Mustard Seed is something called a lay ecumenical missional order, which is a lot of words that may or may not mean anything. But mostly it's a group of people who in their regular everyday lives are trying to have some shared commitments, some shared spiritual practices that help them become more like Jesus. And I just help them with that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's what I do. I work with 24/7 prayer, just helping support prayer communities in the movement. And then I also work at MAS Road Church in Guildford and oversee prayer and spiritual formation there in that local congregational setting.
Jill, the Order of the Mustard Seed, this sounds like something out of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, Knights of the Round Table. Is it anything like any of those things?
It's like a weird hippie cult. Yeah, no, actually it's the Order of the Mustard Seed. It's a missional and monastic order. And what that means is that it's literally a community of shared practice. And what I mean by that is for those of us who are trying to grow and become more like Jesus, it can be easier to do that in community. And it could be easier to do that in community with a particular focus. And it's even easier to do that in community with a particular focus with some shared commitments. So say, for example, if I want to learn how to go from couch to 5K, I could sort of do that by myself and stumble my way forward. Or I could get a Couch to 5K app and get a little bit of structure and system that would help me get off my butt and off of the couch and on the road and running. Or I could get a Couch to 5K app and have a bunch of friends who are doing the same thing, who all show up at my door and we go running together. And so the odds of my actually getting to my goal of running that 5K are much higher if I've got a little bit of supportive structure, a little bit of supported community. And that's really what this missional monastic order is. So we kind of find our roots in history. There was an original order back in 1800s. And basically, it was a student movement. It was a guy named Zinzendorf who was just starting university. And he saw the lifestyle of the other students. And he was like, he just thought, I don't know how I could follow Jesus in this space. So he gathered a group of his friends together, and they created a community of shared practice. So they had some shared commitments, some shared spiritual practices that just helped them become more like Jesus. And so that he kind of did that throughout his life, and it had some extraordinary results, not only for him personally, but in communities that he built. But then after he died, we didn't see the Order of the Mustard Seed so much in history. It kind of slipped away into the mist of history. In 2005, some folks in 24/7 prayer said, you know what, I wonder if this is actually something that might be helpful for us today.
I remember that. I was around when that happened.
Yeah, February 11th, 2005. And so 24/7 as a movement has been so informed and inspired by the Zinzendorf story, because of course he went on, because of those commitments that he'd made, which were to be true to Christ, to be kind to people, take the gospel to the nations. He gathered his community, his local community, and they became a larger community of shared practice. And they're like, why don't we try praying for 24/7? And they just organized themselves around that, started a prayer meeting that went literally over 100 years of praying 24/7.
Wow.
Amazing.
And they did it because they were a community of shared practice. So they had some commitments with each other. They shaped their common life together, and they had this goal of becoming more like Jesus. And it just made a huge difference in church history. 24/7 was totally inspired by that, which has now launched us into going on 25 years of night and day prayer ourselves, which is just so blows my little brain. But in 2005, they were like, okay, you know what? Order the Mustard Seed helped Zinzendorf and his folks live missionally, help them live with Jesus, encounter with Jesus right at the center of who they were. Could this help us? And so it's just a big experiment, really. And so a bunch of folks took vows to join a modern day version of the Order of the Mustard Seed, and then really quietly just tried it for 10 years. Just got on with it and just said, okay, this is an experiment. I don't know if this will help us become more like Jesus or not. And after 10 years, it became evident that it was a really, really helpful discipleship framework. And then at that juncture, we began to organize and grow the order.
Wow.
And so currently we've got about 500 members of the order.
Jill, I've got a couple of questions just from what you've been saying.
Yeah.
One, Hannah, have you ever done a Couch to 5K?
Do I look like I?
Yeah, you do.
Listen,
you look like you could totally do it.
I'm not going to get
I
into
don't know whether that's an offensive question or a compliment. Somewhere in between, probably.
I was just wanted to explore your fitness goals.
I haven't done a Couch to 5K. I have done a 5K, but not post children. I'm afraid the post children phase is a little less fit.
I think the last time I ran a 5K was before I had knee surgery when I was 27, which was a long time ago.
Well, knee surgery is a pretty good excuse.
Yeah, it's not good for running.
I could do a couch to 5 meter, which I think is the distance from my couch to my fridge. So I'm pretty good at that one.
Oh, Jill, I'm an expert at that. I'm fantastic on that one. Jill, just as well, you talk about Order of the Mustard Seed and Count Ludwig von Zinzendorf and his influence upon 24/7 prayer. I'm the International Prayer Director for 24/7 Prayer. That's not a flex.
It's a bit of a flex, isn't it?
But are you an intergalactic? I mean, this is what I want to know.
No, not yet. But I'm not actually a member of the Order of the Mustard Seed. So can you tell me how that works? Because it isn't compulsory.
Oh, yeah, totally not. Actually, I mean, probably you could just naturally live that lifestyle on your own, Brian, without the additional support of, a rule of life and that the shared community of practice. Although, I mean, being part of 24/7, we're all on that journey together, aren't we? So, yeah, I think we find there are some of us who find practicing the way of Jesus, they just do really well. And, that maybe they're part of a church and they've got their Bible study group and whatever that is. And it just works well for them. They feel like, yeah, you know what, I've been able to, with the help of God, craft a holistic lifestyle that helps me become more like Jesus. But then there's others of us who struggle more and are like, you know what, I think I would do better if I had that additional structure, of some shared commitments, some shared spiritual practices. And so for me, actually, the OMS is for those who are struggling more, who are
Sure.
just would benefit from that additional level of support and intentionality. I think for me, I don't know about you, but my life can go in a million directions, and so I just know that I need that those commitments and that community that just brings me back again and again and again to the heart of the gospel. To
Amazing.
love God and to love others. So. Yeah. If you could do it without being part of an order, which most of the people on the planet can, fantastic.
I actually think that's a really helpful point of clarity, because I know I've certainly heard people say, oh, well, could you remind us, Jill, what are the sort of central vows?
Yeah, so our vows are to be true to Christ, kind to people, and take the gospel to the nations.
Love them.
I actually would love to change it and saying gospel to the nations and to my neighbors, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that. But
controversial, Jill.
Yeah, controversial. So essentially, that's the Great Commandment and the Great Commission.
Right.
Like, that's Christianity 101.
Yeah.
And actually, every monastic order in history has been shaped to help people live into the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. But every different missional or monastic order has a particular emphasis on how they might do that. And for us, because we were exploring this within the context of the 24/7 movement, which already had at its heart prayer and creativity and hospitality and mission and justice and learning, we just said, well, actually, those three things, being true to Christ, kind to people, taking the gospel to the nations, we're actually going to use those 6 practices that are already woven into the life of our global movement and focus on them in a particular way to help us become more like Jesus.
Jill, can I dig in a little bit on some of this? You know me, I always have questions, but some would say that, and I've heard this, that monastic orders are introverted. I guess I've always had that kind of picture of a monk withdrawing from the world into a monastery somewhere in Ireland. It's actually quite appealing to me at times, and just lying on a bed and reading scripture and basically gardening and stuff like that. And it's an introverted pastime. How does one, not only, obviously you're saying true to Christ, gospel to the nation, and we get it, but how do we portray this kind of like, this isn't weird?
Well, I think that, first of all, if you look at the history of monastic and missional movements in the tradition of the church since the 3rd century, they were grouped in 2 kind of big categories. And I talk about it when I talk about nuns. For me, I've got some friends back at home in Canada who are nuns, and I think everybody would benefit from having a friend who's a nun.
Everybody needs a nun.
Everybody needs a nun. Yeah, absolutely. But
Sound of Music.
I learned there were 2 kinds of nuns. One was what you're describing, and they would be called cloistered nuns. So their main job is prayer. And so they're kind of in their convent or in their monastery and gardening and all of that and praying. So that's number one. And then there's what they would call apostolic nuns, which is kind of fancy name, but I call those the getting things done nuns. And they're the ones who, yes, they've got rhythms of prayer that they shape their life around, but they are missionaries and hospital administrators and founders of immigrant women's centers and care for refugees. And so you think about some famous sort of monastic people, Mother Teresa, right? She
Mm-hmm.
wasn't hiding in a garden. Like, she was on the front line caring for the poorest of the poor and finding the presence of Jesus in that place. And so in the history of the church, you see this, these 2 broad categories of people called to, and the phrase they use, tricky phrase, a consecrated life, but a life that we've decided on some shared commitments and some shared practices.
Wow.
So some of them are mostly prayer, and lots of others are prayer plus. How do we go meet Jesus on the front lines of people's lives? How do we go to the poorest of the poor? And I think we see that with Zinzendorf and the Moravian movement. They weren't setting up little, garden huts. They were going to the ends of the earth to preach the good news of Jesus. But they were anchored by this night and day prayer call that was on their lives. And so certainly in the 24/7 movement, we've seen expressions of this true to Christ, kind of people, gospel for the nations. And so, we've got communities down in Cape Town, South Africa. The community that I led back in Canada, I led a sort of a new monastic community for 17 years, and we moved into a poor neighborhood in our city. The whole thing was an exploration of how do we have rhythms of life, but then explore what does it look like to be the loving presence of a people of prayer, right, incarnated into this neighborhood.
In one of our other podcasts, we're talking to Pete Portal and the guys at Mannenberg.
Yeah.
But Jill, could you, what is the interface then between the monastic and the world? What did it look like in Hamilton? Can you take that from theory and tell me what does it look like in practice? I mean, I'm always bewildered that monks brew beer. For one thing. Well, I'm not totally bewildered because I enjoyed the fruit of their labor, but obviously that was to interface with the world on one level and make a sustainable economy. But what does it look like, say, in Hamilton, or give me a little bit more? So if someone here was listening, thinking it sounds great in my head, but what does it look like in reality?
Just to preface that, I actually call new monasticism the great experiment. So all we're doing is we're taking a look at some of the historical monastic principles and practices and trying to sort of drag them into the future. Say, is any of this relevant? Right? Does any of this help us to become more like Jesus? Does any of this help us to bring the gospel to our communities? And so we, back in Hamilton in Canada for 17 years, that's still continuing. I think they're coming on they started in 2001. So that was our exploration. And so it looked like lots of things. It looked like we created a prayer room, a storefront kind of level prayer room. It was in the basement of a social enterprise cafe right in one of the poorest parts of our neighborhood, right in the red light district. So if I actually was standing outside of the cafe, Johns in cars would slow down. I'd be like, yeah, no, not for sale, thanks. They drive off. So we're right in the heart of the sex trade.
Sorry, did you just tell me you were mistaken for someone who worked as a prostitute?
I was a few times. I was just like awkward. And
wow.
Yeah. So right, that was the neighborhood, and the local church that met in the cafe that had people who lived in that neighborhood who were living mostly in single residence occupancy, people involved in the sex trade, people like, for me, normal church was people coming stoned or high to church. It was just normal. And just
Wow.
building friendships and relationships with them. So we had that. So we helped a local church in that area, in the cafe. We were part of the life of the cafe throughout the week. We had a prayer center in the basement of the cafe. Bunch of us actually moved right into the neighborhood because we didn't want to figure out how to love the poor from afar. We wanted to be right there. And so my husband and myself had a community house where we lived with anywhere up to 5 or 6 other adults. And it was just this experiment in radical hospitality. And so we would make friends in the neighborhood, and we always had a community dinner every Tuesday night for years and years and years, like 8 years. We called it Spaghetti Tuesday, and we would make friends in the neighborhood and invite them over for supper. And we'd have anywhere between 5 and 35 people, depending on the night. And for me, it was actually my favorite memories of being in Hamilton, and it felt most like the kingdom of God, because the people around the table, some of them were like super clean cut Dutch Christian Reform students from the local Christian university, and other people who were like ex or possibly ex addicts, who used to live in our community house before we got our hands on it, and when it was a crack house. And we shared the family table, and I absolutely loved that. And it just felt most like this is what the kingdom of God looks like. We were given a moving truck. You guys would call it a lorry, I guess, but we would call it a moving van in Canada. And we turned it into a pop-up prayer room. in the back of the truck and put like carpets down and big pillows, and we put paper all on the walls and had musical instruments, and we parked it right in a high kind of footfall area right behind a youth center that we worked with gang related youth, and put just this little folding sign outside of the truck saying, do you need prayer? And so every July, first thing in the morning till late at night, we would be there at the truck praying for people. And we were astonished how many people, mostly unchurched, wanted prayer. And yeah, again, so many stories, so many memories. I think one of my favorite ones is there was a woman who came by one day, and we were handing out water too. It's July, it was hot. And she brought her dog, and her dog was really hot. And so I poured water on top of her dog at her request. But then she showed up at church on Sunday, and she was like, you should go to the prayer truck. She said, they baptize dogs there.
So Jill, you're telling me you were mistaken as a prostitute. You baptized a dog.
Baptized dogs. Yeah,
You used to live in this community doing Spaghetti Tuesdays.
In a crack house.
In an ex-crack house.
Yes, and the favorite Spaghetti Tuesday every year, it was our Christmas tradition. We did Spaghetti Tuesday Elf Edition. And so we would supply the maple syrup, but people had to bring their own candy to put on the spaghetti. And then to top it off, we would all brought big bottles of Coke and would have belching contests.
Amazing.
So that was our Christmas tradition.
Jill, are we talking about sweet things on spaghetti?
Haven't you seen the movie, Brian?
No, I've never seen Elf.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Tracy made me fig spaghetti the other night with figs in it, and I found it quite disturbing.
No, this is full on maple syrup, Smarties, chocolate chips, marshmallows. Yeah, and actually spaghetti with maple syrup on it tastes a little bit like French toast. So that's not too disgusting.
So should I watch Elf?
Oh, yeah, you totally should watch Elf.
I think we should stop everything immediately so that you can go and do that, Brian.
Wow.
Yes.
But Jill,
Christmas.
I think that's just it's so beautiful, isn't it? Because that, Jesus comes to us in the shape of our lives. And so that you would be mistaken for a prostitute, you're coming to people in the shape of their lives. And that, it really reminds me of Jesus in the Gospels when people would say, oh, what's he doing eating with these people and being in this place? And it just seems to me that that's the kinds of questions that people should be asking, whether they're literally stopping their cars when we're standing there or not. We should be, living lives that are under scrutiny and under questions from, the more civilized parts of society, I think.
I once heard someone say, when was the last time your reputation was called into account because of the company you keep?
Wow. Can I ask, Jill? Because I think, some of those stories, all of that was so beautiful. I'm going to ask, I think in a way, the answer to this question should be obvious, but I'm genuinely curious to know. So you shared about, the vows of the OMS, and the goal of it is that people would be, following Jesus more closely, and their spiritual lives would be richer, and that they would be reaching the nations, or as you would like to say, the neighbours. I guess both. Does it work?
Does it work? Do you know what? I think for me and for many members of the order, we've got an OMS podcast, which you can find on the Order of the Mustard Seed website, where I interview members of the order and say, how's it working for you? How is it?
Oh my goodness,
helpful?
You've just come on a podcast and advertised your own podcast.
I just did that. Did you catch that? That's pretty good.
Fantastic. So good. Carry on, sorry.
No, it's fine. And I interview them and ask them questions, and basically ask that question, like, did it work? And so I interviewed my friend Gwen, who's a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids. And we just said, okay, how does this work for you? And she talked about how she's using her dinner table as a place of radical hospitality and discipleship, and building this kind of ethos into the life of her family and her children. And she would say, yeah, it works for me. And so story after story of people. I have a friend who's a member of the OMS, had a season as a politician. And as a politician, the hardest of the vows was to be kind, because the political, sphere is not a kind place to be. And so how to live as a person of kindness in the midst of that kind of environment is a bold witness to the power of the gospel. And I think for me, honestly, I had a point, you guys, where it was probably about 2 to 3 years in of this community living and living in this neighborhood and all the stuff that we did. made me look back and go, like, what kind of disciple was I before this?
Wow.
It was just like, wow, it was really challenging for me. And I just thought, whoa, I had been so comfy cozy. And, but to actually, I think the thing about that I love about, being part of an order like this is you give God permission when you're like, okay, I am taking a vow. I'm making a commitment in the presence of other people
Yeah.
to give myself wholeheartedly to the gospel. God takes you up on that. You are giving him permission. So say, for example, one of my vows was to take the gospel to the nations, which I was like, yeah, that'd be great, but I loved my city in Hamilton and loved the work that I was doing there. I had been there for 17 years, was starting to see real transformation around me in the lives of our neighborhood and our leaders. But I made the mistake of making a vow to take the gospel to the nations.
Wow, yeah.
And then all of a sudden I got this invitation from God saying, can you leave everything you've built here, all of your friends that you would take a bullet for, even your daughter, which was the hardest thing. And will you go to the nations? Will you relocate? Will you come to the UK? Will you start to build this kind of international center here at Waverley Abbey to raise up or create an incubator that raises up gospel champions that will get spat out to all the nations? Are you willing to do that? And I realized that, like, oh crap, I had already made a vow. I had already said to God beforehand that I would be willing. And then he he's like, all right, put your money where your mouth is, Jill. If you said you're up for it, then let's do this. And that was just really challenging for me.
Okay, a thought I have, I'm practicing all these practices. I'm, running my life to rule of life, and I then turn up to normal church on a Sunday morning. And I look around and I see that people aren't. How do I avoid spiritual superiority?
Oh, good question.
You know what? For me, one of the best things that I do to avoid spiritual superiority is I spend every day, part of my rule of life is spending some time of self-reflection every day and saying, Lord, have I got any sin in me? And actually, I really enjoy the night prayers, Hannah. Enjoy the night prayers, Selectio, because it helps me do an examine every day. And it becomes very evident to me if I make a practice of self-reflection as part of my spiritual practices that I am keenly and painfully aware of how we all sin and fall short of the glory of God, and I'm screwing up all the time.
Just a minute there. Hannah, explain to me what an examine is if you do the night prayers on our Lectio 365 app.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're advertising all kinds of things today.
Oh, yeah.
Here we are.
This is really bad, isn't it? Next, I'm going to be advertising my book and your book and...
plugging so many other resources. Well, yes, what Jill is referring to is, if you haven't come across the Lectio 365 app, is the idea behind Lectio is it comes from the Lectio Divina, which was kind of a style of reading the scripture in a slightly less, intellectual capacity and slightly more heart-led approach to reading the scripture, and more to the point, letting the scripture read you. So that's the idea behind Lectio. So if you download the app, you can see you can do morning prayers or night prayers. So in the morning, there's it's a little bit more devotionally focused, a little bit more of a thought for the day to take into your day with you. And then in the night prayers, we based it on the ancient practice of examine, so the idea is that it's sort of looking into the rearview mirror back on your day and essentially asking God where he was in the day, where you were in the day, like Jill said, where have I actually not been that true to Christ in this day. But it's beautifully redemptive, because it's then, you go through that moment of kind of repentance and remembering where you've maybe, you've not been so happy with how you've been, but you bring that to God, and then there's a beautiful moment of kind of receiving his grace, and then you go to sleep, and you lie down to rest, having received afresh the grace of God over your day. So it's a helpful practice, because I think we can get so busy, and you're in the flurry of everyday life, and you can get quite abstract about some of this stuff, can't you? Like, oh yeah, we're we're all sinners, or, oh yeah, God's been with me in my day. But actually, when you sit down to take 5 minutes to think, oh, where was God with me in my
Mhm.
day? You know, it actually lands that moment for you. And you kind of, for me, it definitely helps me to remember that God is active and present in my life. You know, sometimes you can, you know He's there, but until you articulate it, you don't really notice. So for me, it's like a really helpful practice of noticing and saying, okay, I can see that God was there. And then also just, like Jill said, you know, you remember your own fallenness.
Gives me
Um,
guilt-free sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just acknowledging just our own brokenness and humanity, and just knowing that,
Mm,
you know what, this is the beauty of the gospel, right? We can come to Him every day going, oh, Jesus, I'm sorry, did it again,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every day He forgives. I mean, this is the beauty. This is the good news, right?
Mm,
That all of our brokenness, all of our worst choices, all of our decisions, you know, that hurt ourselves and others have all been dealt with on the cross
mm,
by the death and the
Yes.
resurrection of Jesus. And
Fantastic.
it's just astonishing for me to be able to live in that freedom, to just kind of lay it down. And so consequently, if I'm just going, okay, here I am again, God, you know, and warts and all, and then who am I to look at somebody else who's in an order or out of an order, or you know, whatever, and
Wow.
look
Yeah.
down my nose at them and go, oh well,
yeah.
I'm better than. So yeah, you know, when I think about the earliest expressions of monasticism, you know, the Desert Fathers in Egypt, sort of 300 AD, you look at the sayings of the Desert Fathers, and they were so clear that they were not judging each other,
Yeah.
that they were not, you know, they refused to. They're like, you know what, God is people's judge, and I'm just keenly aware of my own frailty and my
Right.
desperate need for God to be with me and to transform me and make me new. And yeah, I think that really helps me, at least.
And Jill, as your friends, we would echo that we see that in your life very clearly. So thank you for modeling
Absolutely.
that so well. One of the things that we've been thinking about is we're hearing a lot these days about awakening. And you know, we are contending for the next great awakening. There are people all around the world praying for revival or looking for awakening. What would you say a spiritual awakening would look like in your context?
Well, I think the thing that gets me up in the morning, my favorite definition of awakening or revival is that revival is God consciousness. You know, it's and
Mm,
we
that's
see
very
that in
good.
histories of revivals in various ways, and I think that if we can live attentive and responsive to the presence and the activity of God, we are awakened people, and we can awaken others. And so, you know, so we think about revival. I mean, I was part of the Toronto Blessing
Wow.
in oh
Did
yeah,
did
yeah.
you fall over
Oh yeah, all kinds of stuff.
and
You name it.
laugh
You
and do
name
all
it.
of
I
that?
did it driving home from the meetings, completely drunk in the spirit. Like if I got pulled over by the cops, I would have been in trouble.
Well,
And
you would have been clear on a tox report.
yeah, but I couldn't have walked in a straight line, you know. So yeah, no, I was in the thick of all of that for a lot of years.
So
And
you're not like some sort of Anglican Catholic hippie monk. You're actually got some charismatic roots in
oh
there.
yeah, no, I could swing from the chandeliers with the rest of them. So
Okay.
I actually call myself a Presby Anglo Baptist Catholic hostel. So and just because I love the whole body, and it's just a fantastic banquet to feast from.
Mm.
Oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, awakening. So I've seen that. Been in a room, and all of a sudden this kind of manifest presence of the Lord just drops everyone to the ground. And you know, I've seen all of that for a lot of years. And you know, and it's great to have this kind of moments and meetings. But what I'm really, really interested in is how do we cultivate a lifestyle that makes room for awakening?
Right.
And so my longing and my desire is how do we help everybody in their ordinary lives
Yeah.
be attentive to and responsive to the presence and the activity of God. And so being attentive to solitude, silence, Sabbath, you know, meditating on the scriptures, noticing the presence of Jesus in each other, even in conversation, just having eyes
Right.
and heart open that Jesus is with us all the time throughout our day. So there's one piece, but then the second piece is responsive to the heart that's preset to yes. And the thing I say over and over again, it's like, okay, God, the answer is yes. Now what's the question?
I like that.
Right? And if we can live that way, everything's going to change. And if we could train a whole generation to live that way, you know what? We're going to see all kinds of individual and community and national, international transformation.
Amazing.
Vision.
I think sometimes God must just smile at the ignorance of our yeses.
If we only knew.
If you kind of really thought, when you said yes to him for salvation, that's one thing. But when you said yes to him for, here, Lord, take my life, I just picture him chuckling as if to say, okay, I'll do that. And then he takes us on these, I think it was Helen Keller who said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And I think when we say yes to God, he takes us on these daring adventures, which is beautiful.
Love that.
I love that.
True. So true. I would say everything in the last 25 years of my life has been that, living out the daring adventure.
Wow.
Beautiful, Jill. We're asking everyone this question. What one experience of prayer will you never forget?
My probably most memorable prayer meeting was my very first prayer meeting, where I was 14 years old and I was at a summer camp. And they sent us outside into the woods off on their own. And I wasn't a believer. I didn't know God at all. And they said, go find somewhere by yourself and pray. So I went outside. I sat under a tree and it was sort of dusky, dark. And I had no idea how to pray. I'd learned the Lord's Prayer at school. So we recited that back in the day when you could still do that. So I did what felt very logical for me at the moment. I looked up, because I figured if there was a God, he was probably up, and I just said, hi, I'm Jill. And in that moment, there was this tangible sense of an invisible other, some kind of presence there with me under the tree. And it didn't feel scary. It didn't feel like malevolent, but just there was somebody there with me under the tree that I couldn't see. So then I did what every sensible teenager does when they meet invisible beings in the dark. I ran back to my cabin. And the next day they shared the gospel with us and invited us to become disciples of Jesus. And I immediately responded, because I'm like, well, duh, I can only imagine that God is the only invisible person around. So, and evidently he started a conversation, a relationship with me last night. So at the very least, it would be impolite not to respond. And so for that, I think for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about 24/7 prayer, about creating prayer rooms, why I'm so passionate about the Order of the Mustard Seed and what we're building here at Waverly Abbey. Because I think if we can create spaces and invite people, anybody, whether they know God or not, into that space, and if we can incite them to start a conversation, to say, hi, I'm Brian, or hi, I'm Hannah, anything can happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Jill, thank you for saying yes to the invisible other. And thank you so much for your unrehearsed life that just seems to model a lifestyle that is responsive to the leading of the Spirit. Thank you for jumping into that metaphorical coracle and ending up on these shores. It's been an absolute joy to listen to you this morning. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity, you guys.
Thank you for listening to the 24/7 Prayer Podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our work, please do visit 247prayer.com.